Joining us now to discuss the new efforts to make sure that Nigeria gets a new electoral law ahead of the 2023 election cycle and how this will affect preparations for the conduct of the general election is a former national chairman of the All Progressives Grand Alliance, APGA, Senator Victor Ume. Good to have you join us on the program. But let's quickly get right into it. It will be interesting to sort of gauge your thoughts regarding the amendment bill, the Electoral Amendment bill. Let's take your thoughts regarding what your initial thoughts are.
Well, thank you very much. I will say that I am very happy that the National Assembly, as promised to Nigerians, were able to resume in earnest discussions over this bill, following the withholding of assent by Mr. President. I recall that when the National Assembly passed this bill, which the President declined assent, I was quick to join the discussion to say that legislating that only direct primaries shall be the means of nominating candidates for elective positions in Nigeria was wrong. I disagree with the National Assembly at that time because, one, I was a party administrator. I was national chairman of APGA for 10 years. And I had to look at the two options, direct and indirect primaries. And I couldn't see any difference between the two in terms of effect. If the National Assembly was running away from control of the process by anybody, direct primaries and indirect primaries are just like 6 and half a dozen. The party leaders will conduct the process. The party administrators will conduct each process, whether direct primaries or indirect primaries. And if their fear was that some people will hijack the process, the same people will administer both. So I had thought that there was no need to tamper with the previous provision where we had direct primaries and indirect primaries. But like I expected, the president hinged his withholding of assent on that provision, direct primaries, which was actually in line with my thoughts. I had expected when the National Assembly resumed, they will deal with that particular issue that made the president to withhold the assent through his observations and comments. He said he didn't subscribe to direct primaries as the sole means of nominating candidates. But curiously, yesterday, the Senate, in trying to address the concerns of the president, introduced a new dimension altogether. In the old bill, it was direct or indirect primaries, and now they said direct primaries or indirect primaries or consensus. That word consensus has created a new scenario entirely, which I believe is, if it's not a ploy to frustrate this amendment process, there was no need for it. Somebody had said that when there is a single aspirant to one elective position, that it is a consensus. It is not a consensus. When there is a single aspirant, you still go through the requirements of the provisions of the Act in affirming that candidate by organizing a special congress where all the party members or the delegates, as the case may be, will affirm that single aspirant as a candidate. They may reject him in a yes or no vote. So when you put consensus as a means of nomination, what it means entirely is that you are now saying that that party can nominate a candidate through consensus. And the question is, who are the people who will take the decision in arriving at a consensus? Would that be all the party members or the party stakeholders or all the party leaders? What are the grounds? And in this amended bill by the Senate, you will see that serially, they made elaborate provisions on how each process will go. If you choose direct primaries, these are the steps you must follow. If you choose indirect primaries, these are the steps you must follow. In the case of a consensus candidate, how do you arrive at a consensus candidate? The bill, the amended bill now did not state how the party can nominate a candidate by consensus. Instead, it said where there is a single aspirant or a consensus candidate. There's not is a contradiction of sorts. So I had thought that the National Assembly would have simply gone ahead to address the concerns of the president while he withheld the assent, which is introducing back indirect primaries as a system of nominating candidates alongside direct primaries. The option will now be available to the political party to exercise. So this consensus they put there is an aberration of sorts. Because if you send it back to the president, how are you sure that the president will subscribe to the consensus means of nominating a candidate? Particularly as the bill failed to enumerate the steps a political party will go through in nominating a candidate by consensus. It's quite different from where there is one single aspirant for a position where the party will not be left with no option than to organize a special congress and ask all
Senator
the party members
Ume, allow me to interrupt you briefly. We are now being joined in our Abuja studios by Lanre Arogundade, who is joining us this afternoon to discuss the new efforts to make sure that Nigeria gets this new electoral law ahead of the 2023 election cycle. He's joining us via Zoom. Good afternoon, sir. We want to get your own take on the current issues that are going on right now, especially concerning direct primaries, indirect primaries, and of course, consensus. What is your take?
Well, our take, and I'm speaking for a group of civil society organizations that already issued a statement on this development, where we were surprised that the Senate decided to bring in the element of consensus in addition to direct and indirect primaries. Apparently, they were actually following, what the president said in his interview with one of the television stations. But for us, it would have been okay if they had followed the example of the House of Representatives that simply provided for direct and indirect primaries. This is because when it comes to consensus, just like Senator Ume was just saying, you could have a number of problematics as what exactly constitutes a consensus. How do you arrive at a consensus? And our concern all along is that we should have an electoral law that will be so clear, will be so straightforward, and would prevent unnecessary litigations. And you know the nature of our political system. It's where you have all these primaries and so on. Candidates, aspirants go to court, and you have all kind of litigations. This idea of consensus may just be a kind of booby trap that may lead to unnecessary litigations. However, our position also is that now that they have two versions, as it were, the two houses should quickly move into the harmonization stage, because that is what is required by the procedure, have an harmonization so that by tomorrow, the harmonized copy would definitely go to the president. It might just be that the House of Reps may agree with the Senate about the consensus or whatever, but we've also said that this particular Electoral Act Amendment Bill contains a number of fundamental provisions that would enhance the integrity of the electoral process. And so we're concerned about those ones. Ordinarily, like I said, it would have been better if this consensus element was not brought in. But now that it has been brought in, let the Senate and the House of Reps quickly move to the harmonization stage. And we're still standing by our statement that the new bill, free of all errors, in addition to the amendment that we made, should get back to the president by tomorrow, which is January 21.
Senator Ume, this question is for you. The amendment process has been delayed enough, and with this lack of harmony between the upper and the lower chambers, it might be delayed further. Now, are you worried perhaps that there might be some form of ploy or conspiracy, to frustrate the electoral process?
Your suspicion is as good as mine, because the National Assembly, in the last bill they transmitted to Mr. President for assent, did not include consensus. So when the President declined assent, citing provision for direct primaries as a sole reason for sending the bill back, the National Assembly ought to have addressed the concern of the President by simply bringing back the indirect primaries as an option. This extraneous injection of consensus, I see it as a ploy to model up the process one more time. I may be wrong, but I'm very happy that the House of Representatives were very correct in rejecting the consensus option, because it's going to spark off another round of controversies. If this thing is sent back to the Mr. President, nobody knows what his view will be over consensus. So we don't know. We have lost a lot of time. And like my brother, the previous contributor said, there were many fundamental milestones already recorded in the previous bill that was passed. The bimodal voter accreditation system that was captured in that bill and passed, the electronic transmission of results that was captured and passed. Now, this issue of direct and indirect primaries, I said, there was nothing to delay us with that. Now that the indirect primaries has been brought back, bringing in consensus may be a ploy to delay the process again. And we want a quick passage of this bill and quick assent to the bill by Mr. President. So I stand on all fours with the House of Representatives. The consensus option is purely undemocratic, and in the bill, which they intend to transmit back to Mr. President for assent, they didn't specify, like they elaborately did in the case of direct primaries and indirect primaries. They did not elaborately specify how a consensus candidate will emerge if a political party chooses consensus option to nominate its candidate. Who are the people that will meet and agree that somebody has become a consensus candidate? You can see it's going to open up a whole lot of arguments, squabbles, and the rest of it. So we don't need it. Every legislation will be aimed at solving all existing problems and removing areas of ambiguities. I've just perused through the past bill yesterday again, and I saw that the Senate was very correct in making some amendments again further, where they have now resolved in the final provision that issues about litigation, where somebody is aggrieved, you can only bring an action in the Federal High Court of Nigeria, no longer High Court of a state or High Court of the Federal Capital Territory, as the case may be.
Yes, indeed.
Because the previous provision made it possible for people to run around, do foreign shopping, and cause confusion.
Yes.
So where you are aggrieved, if you were an aspirant that took part in a primary, you go to the Federal High Court.
Yes,
yes,
that's
indeed. That's an ingenious amendment.
It is ingenious, and it does make total sense. But let me quickly bring in Lanre again, the director at the International Press Center. Lanre, I heard you, I mean, we've all heard you earlier on, and we've also heard the senator as well. And some of the points that both of you raised, make absolute sense. But at the end of the day, this is more about democracy, and then surely you would agree that it's a democratic process to allow the parties choose for themselves. So it's not about you and I, it's not about the state, it's not about the president, it's more about the parties and who they choose to represent or who they want to nominate. So do you not think by any chance that the party actually has the right to nominate whoever they so wish? And let's not also forget that at the end of the day, one of the reasons why the bill was rejected was because there was only the option of direct primaries. Now we have so many other options, but here you guys are again complaining about the other options that have been included. So there's a lot of back and forth, and yet you blame the other parties for delaying the process. So I want you to react and gauge, some of the things that I have said.
Well, political parties have the right to choose their candidates, to decide on the procedure. But we also have to operate, the political parties also have to operate within the framework of the law. And in this instance, it has to be the Electoral Act. You can't just leave things like that and say that they can do anything. There has to be a guidance. And the point we've made really is that it will have been better to limit this to direct and indirect primaries.
But limiting, sorry to cut in, limiting
just listen.
No, I understand. I'm just saying limiting is in itself undemocratic, do you not think? Because the main bone of contention...
It's not undemocratic, because it's just saying that you should use, two methods, which really are more democratic and open. Now, when you say consensus, the question really is, what constitutes consensus? How do you arrive at consensus? And we're looking into the future, the fact that this may create further problems in terms of unnecessary litigations. And you have seen how court cases actually mar the electoral process. But that is by the way. The position of civil society organizations, 12 of us, not just International Press Center, IAGA Africa, many others, Institute for Media and Society, Albino Foundation, is that just get the harmonization done. We didn't ask them to have different versions. It's not our own making. Our demand earlier on was that they should quickly drop the issue of direct primaries, which the president objected to, and then work on other errors that we've noticed, the cross-referencing gaps and other errors in referencing, and then send a cleaner copy back to the president, who has said he would sign if direct primaries are not insisted upon. That was our demand. That was, the basis of the press conference we had in Abuja on Monday. So we didn't say that anybody should introduce consensus, but it has so happened now that unfortunately we have two versions. And that fear, like Senator Omer said, is that this could actually further delay the process. So we've gone beyond, insisting on consensus and so on. It's just our opinion that we think it could be undemocratic. But beyond that, now that you, House of Reps, says you want direct and indirect only, and the Senate says they want direct, indirect, and consensus, have a meeting, agree on whichever, and let us move on. Because, like he also said, there are fundamental provisions in this bill that would enhance the integrity of our electoral process. For example, if it's signed into law, then it means that INEC would have to get its fund, by next month, because the bill says that the fund that INEC will use for elections should get to INEC at least a year before, the elections. And where are we now? We're talking of, general elections in February, and we're having all this debate back and forth on, just like that, really. And don't forget, too, that like previous bills, we had the petroleum industry bill, which the president signed, and then, proposed, amendment thereafter. So the fear really is that bringing this now could lead to a lot of acrimonious debates and whatever. But whatever the case may be, we're just trying to remind the Senate and the House of Representatives that you've done a lot of work on this, particular bill, and it will be too bad if it does not become the law that will govern, elections. We're also concerned because there are what we call off-cycle elections, the Ekiti governorship election, the Osun governorship election. We want a situation whereby, on the basis of this law, those innovations already introduced by INEC, including electronic transmission of results, the use of BVAS and all others, would be tested, so that ahead of general elections, they would have seen areas of gaps and other things and have them fulfilled. There are also other fundamental provisions. For example, the period for campaign, the period for the conclusion.
Mr. Arogundade, thank you so much. We have heard you. We have heard you, but I have to interrupt you so that we can quickly take, one more question, ask one more question from Senator Ume. Senator Ume, I think one of the fears is that we do not want, anybody to hijack the electoral process. So I'm thinking that shouldn't we also be having the discussion of strengthening the internal democracies, the internal democracy of political parties, in tandem with this electoral bill?
Yes, correctly said. All these amendments were geared towards enhancing and strengthening our democratic culture indirect primaries and direct primaries. They have their pros and cons. At the National Assembly, section of National Assembly, were actually trying to resist imposition of candidates on the parties through the use of indirect primaries, which they thought that the governors will have absolute control over. They tried to do that. But I have pointed out that whether direct or indirect, it is the internal democracy in the political parties that will give us what we are looking for. So trying to bring in consensus, which is very difficult to achieve. Well, okay, look at direct primaries and indirect primaries. They are bogged by litigations at every exercise. Now, how do you think that a political party will achieve a consensus, where you have given them opportunity to do something that looks like an election to nominate candidates and people will be aggrieved? How do you think party members will feel when suddenly you begin to talk about consensus, that this person is chosen, therefore no process of selecting him? Leaders have agreed. So that's why I'm saying that the House of Representatives were right on point by dropping that consensus option. The conference committee will meet and resolve this issue very quickly, because there's no elaborate provision about consensus in the amendment they did yesterday. So there's no reason why it will be delayed. It's a question of agreeing with the House of Representatives, give them concurrence, and delete consensus. And the whole document will be sent to the president for his assent. The whole controversy will abate. So in order to salvage this, we'll have to be looking at the far implications of these amendments to our democracy. Whether the people, democracy is defined as government of the people, by the people, for the people. And it will apply to internal ways of bringing candidates for an elective position, because people are members of a party. They must allow the people to decide who becomes their candidate. That is the major essence.
Senator
So
Victor Ume,
we should leave political parties to choose candidates, then it means that you are giving political parties the opportunity to appoint candidates. Anybody they decide they put for you. No, that is not the intendment of the law.
Senator, thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have to abruptly interrupt you and cut the interview short. We have run out of time. Thank you so much for joining the program this afternoon, Senator Victor Ume and Lanre Arogundade. Thank you so much.